Good evening and welcome to A Kind Affair with Jackson Woodward. Today we will be interviewing Douglas Fraser Allen from World War One. Yeah, just take a seat there, Douglas. That'll be fine. Yeah, thanks for having me, Jackson. So, just to start things off, can you give the viewers a quick description of your youth before war? Yeah, so life as a kid was extremely difficult. I worked on a farm with my dad, William Allen, and worked all day to impress him, really. I lived in Scotland in a small town called Huntly, just north of Aberdeenshire. There was no real source of entertainment in this town with 4,000 people spread across the vast land. I spent most days either in the house or with my dad. I was born in 1890, then I moved to Sydney in 1909. Interesting. What role did you play in the war? So I was a bomber. Not one that flew a plane, but would throw a handheld explosive into the enemy trench. Bombers were the soldiers without guns, meaning it was a lot more dangerous, as well as not having any other weapons than grenades and a knife. Bombers would have to expose themselves to get a good throw. I was also promoted to sergeant when the Allied forces were evacuated from Gallipoli, which meant I led my battalion once I registered to fight in France. That sounds brutal. As a bomber, I know that you were in the trenches most of your days in war. What were the conditions like in these trenches? From my experience working around trenches, the condition of all of them were horrendous. There would be blood mixed in with mud and animal feces. The trenches weren't a place you'd like to go. The trenches were also the place where soldiers would get their wounds infected. Almost every single soldier spent all their time in war up until the day they died in these trenches. There were many different types of trenches. There were trenches that were made from large bomb blasts. There were trenches that were made from soldiers digging into the sand, covering themselves from being seen. That's just disgusting. Did you have any trouble with supplies in Lone Pine? Yeah, supply was very limited in Lone Pine. Soldiers eventually had to make weaponry themselves, such as the bombers in Lone Pine. Grenades were made in trenches with jam and condensed milk cans, and were packed with gunpowder, metal shrapnel, and barbed wire. Most people who weren't bombers had to salvage ammunition and weapons from their deceased mates. This was from the Turkish blocking the opening of the river, which would be used to get supplies directly to troops. That's very creative. So when and why did you enlist in war? So I enlisted in war in November 1914. I enlisted because I came from a small town in Scotland working on a farm with my dad. When I was on the farm, I would always try and make him proud. And when the word got out about the war, I thought it would be the perfect way to make him proud. That's the way to do it. What did you undergo in training to be a specialist bomber? Training as a bomber was extremely hard. We were taught how to throw grenades across something like a cricket pitch, as well as being inside of a trench in a training facility, pulling the pin and throwing the grenade over a tall fence. Oh, you'd have to be very skilled to do that. When you were sent to France, what were your thoughts when you got there? Yeah, so my battalion was sent to Egypt after being evacuated after the Battle of Gallipoli, and then we were sent to France in March 1916. When the 1st Battalion reached France, the country was not how I expected it to be. The land was extremely muddy and destroyed from the previous enemy bomb shells, ruining the landscape. I wouldn't like to be there. What was the cause of you leaving war? So I was in France. My battalion was reinforcing an attack on a heavily armed German trench. I was shot in the upper thigh, but despite my wound that I just received, I couldn't just let my men die like this. I put my injury aside and I did my absolute best to cover my men. There were only 2 men left with me until I decided it was the right time to retreat from the situation. Geez, you were lucky to make it out of that. After war, did you partake in any work? After the war, when I got to Australia, I drove a horse-drawn tray selling common essentials to the public. Unfortunately, when motorised vehicles started to become increasingly affordable, I had to find a new job. I then worked as a linesman. A linesman job was to set up telephone poles. I did this job around the suburbs of Sydney where I lived. When I started to age older and older, I retired. I then moved to Townsville to live with my wife. And last, to finish off today's interview, what was your overall view on war? Overall, war was something that no man should have ever gone through. I, as a bomber, was extremely lucky to have survived. Many other soldiers and civilians were killed during the war and didn't make it back to their loved ones. The flag should have been waved way earlier than it did. Too many people's lives were taken to have called this war successful. War was mentally and physically scarring. I'm just grateful I could put my thoughts about what happened to the side. Many people that made it back to their home suffered a disorder where a simple pot falling on the ground would trigger this disorder and bring back the physical aspect of war in their head. Yes, I certainly agree with that. Thank you so much for joining us today, Douglas. It was a pleasure having you. And thank you for having me, Jackson. So, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up today's interview. My name is Jackson Woolwood. You've been watching Current Affair. Back to you, Mr. C.